What's going on, everybody? Chasing that bass, coming back to you guys with another little video. Today we're going to talk about the workhorse, arguably one of the best big fish catching baits that has been thrown for a long time. But before we get to that, if you're new, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Leave me a like down below if you like this video, and drop me a comment on what kind of video you want me to bring to you next. So, the workhorse, or what I'm talking about today, the jig. Now, before we get into the specifics of each bait, I do want to run you guys through the couple different styles of jigs that there are. There's going to be styles like this. This is called a football head. You want to use a football head or this wide head on rocks because it won't get wedged down in the rocks. It'll stay on top a lot better. The specific ones I use actually have a flat spot right here on the back of the head so that when it hits that bottom, it helps the bait stand up. The next one I want to talk about is just what we call a casting jig head. This is more of a round jig head. This is kind of like an all-purpose head. It does decent around grass. It does decent in the rocks. It can fish around wood. It doesn't roll over real bad in the wood. So this is going to be a jig that you see a lot of guys throwing a lot of the time. Now, when we fish around here in Indiana, what I've learned is we have a ton of grass lakes, like thick, nasty, heavy grass, and the casting head and the football head are both going to get hung up in the grass a lot more than this next style of head I'm going to show to you. This to me is probably the best, and let me grab a bigger jig head for you. We've got a ton of them in here. The jig that I throw around Indiana 95% of the time is gonna be more of a pointed head. It's a little bit of like a hybrid design of that casting jig head. Now, this is a Denny Brower structure jig from Strike King. I use the big sizes, I use the small sizes, cover a lot of different water with that. To me, this has been the workhorse in my tackle box and something that I'm throwing all the time. The last style of head that you're going to have to deal with is going to be a swim jig head. It's a little bit different. It's got a little bit different weighted design so that it allows that bait to kind of stay up in the water column and swim really well. Gives the paddle tail kickers like this a really good action when it comes to throwing those swimmers. So back to the three styles. When I'm fishing deep cover, it's going to depend on if I'm fishing the grass or if I'm fishing hard rock bottoms. A lot of time when you're fishing deep, you're fishing harder structure. So you'll see me throwing a lot more of these structure heads. I've got a ton of different ones. Basically, fishing deep, this boils down to water clarity. I like to throw green pumpkin. This one here is a green pumpkin with some purple flake. I've got some a little bit more true green pumpkin. Anything in that green pumpkin color range, I'm going to be throwing in pretty clean water. I'm also going to throw it in a little bit stained when the water's, 4 or 5 foot of visibility. Once it gets down to a little bit darker or a little bit less visibility, like 2 to 4 foot, I do like to throw still a green pumpkin, but I like to go with something that has some yellows and some oranges that has a little bit more pop to it. And then obviously, for fishing really dark stained water, the staples. We're going to be throwing a black and blue or something like this. It's got some blacks, some blues, some purples. Also going to be throwing my probably all-time favorite color, something in the June bug fashion. That's going to be kind of the staples for me when it comes to fishing deep. Again, just using the structure head or throwing kind of that more all-purpose around here in Indiana with the weeds of that Denny Brower jig. Then the second category we're going to talk about, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, swim jig. So this to me is like the Cadillac of shallow fishing. When those fish don't want to eat a chatterbait, they don't necessarily want to eat a finesse bait, I've found that throwing a swim jig can get you a ton of bites. Now, I've already shown you 2 different color patterns when it comes to that. I strictly throw a couple of different swim jigs. I do really like the Tactical Bass and Matt Allen. I like the finesse swim jig head. It's got a little bit lighter of a hook and I really like how all of the bottom skirting's cut out of that, so it's really not a crazy big presentation or bulky presentation. It's still got really good movement from that skirting. And another big one that I've been throwing, I've got some local guys that make jigs. Shout out to Kevin. He makes some really great swim jigs as well. This one specifically I got from another local bait maker. Pardon me, his name is blowing my mind right now. But I really like his swim jig specifically because on here, let me get this guy undone. He's got a screw lock keeper. When I'm throwing the swim jig, the last thing I want is for that bait to come off of there. And I'm trying to catch as many fish as possible because some days you're catching fish almost every cast, or you're catching fish really consistently. And the last thing I want to do is run through a box of Kitex in a short order or short fashion because they're expensive. So that screw lock allows me to catch a couple more fish per bait, keeps my line in the water more, which helps with efficiency and also saves you a couple bucks. So if you're in the market for swim jigs, I will get his name and drop his name down in the comment section below for you and put you on. He makes some really quality jigs as well. They're called Thorax jigs. If you're looking for them, you can find them on Facebook as well. Yeah, shout out to Kevin for some of his jigs as well. Kevin makes some really good, kind of like my structure jig here, the Denny Brower series. Kevin is Tight Liners Customs. Really great products. Both guys, local guys here to Indiana. When it comes to the swim jigs, I throw 3 different sizes. Every once in a great while, if I'm fishing dirt, shallow, I'll throw that in a 1/4 ounce. But a lot of times I'm throwing this 5/16 ounce head, or I'm throwing a 3/8 ounce. And that just depends on A, the depth I'm fishing, and B, what I'm trying to make the bait do. So then, talking on our last kind of topic when it comes to jigs for chase, I like to throw finesse jigs. I've got a couple different ones in here. Now, right back to Strike King, the Strike King Denny Brower structure jig. They do have like a mini version that comes in 1/4 and 3/8 ounce. I throw those little jigs a ton. I like to throw them basically anytime I just think that I need a downsized presentation. Now, I also throw one of Kevin's tight liners. He's built me a couple of these. His finesse jig head is just a little ball head. With all that skirting and as short as he keeps them cut, you get a real good spidery look on the front. And he's got a really sharp hook on the back of that keeps my fish pinned when I'm throwing small baits. This one here is actually 1/8 of an ounce. And I like to throw that bad boy on really light finesse line. Like, again, I've talked about this in the previous videos. 10-pound braid to an 8-pound fluoro. Now, when it comes to my trailers for these baits, really I'm going to throw 2 or 3 different trailers. A lot of times I like to throw the paddle tail. Now, my finesse jigs and stuff, I like to throw a net baits pack a chunk. What I've found is that net bait pack a chunk, or the mini pack of chunks, if you leave your skirting long enough to where it actually impedes with those swimmer arms, it'll just be like a regular chunk trailer and it doesn't have a whole lot of kick or action. Now, when I think the fish are being more aggressive, I will trim that skirting back to where those arms get free flapping, loose action, and it throws off a ton of water and gets a lot of bites. Now, they are pretty soft baits, but they're relatively cheap, so I keep a lot of those in the boat, and those are going to be kind of the trailers that I'm throwing there. When it comes to my deep jigs, I just go to a little bit bigger. I'm big on being simple, so I do like to throw them. And one that you saw earlier as I had this bait out is that Reaction Innovations. I like to throw the smallie beaver or the regular sized beaver on there, either a 3.5 or a 4.2 for like a subtle action. And when I'm wanting it to glide a little more, because what I can do is leave those 2 pinchers together and it adds a little bit of a glide action to the bait. I also throw it with kind of the flapper crawls. This one here I've got rigged up with a rage crawl. This is a really good secret color combo I'll give you guys when the fish are in darker stained water, but they've kind of seen a lot of baits. I'll throw like that black and blue jig with a green pumpkin trailer and throw off and displace the water, but still give them something that's kind of semi-natural. Here's another just variant of that Rage Crawl. I got that one dipped with a little bit of red dip and glow on the tails just to give it a little bit of a different presentation, because when it comes to fishing, I just want to throw something those fish haven't seen, especially if I'm fishing where a lot of other guys have fished. So when it comes to jigs, that's going to cover a good basis. So leave me a comment down below. What is your favorite jig or your favorite jig style? What do you like to throw when it comes to fishing the jig? But my recommendation is to pick up some of these. If you're going to be throwing that finesse one, I like to say stick with a 7-foot medium, maybe even a medium heavy rod. I've had a lot of success just throwing a medium with that braid to fluoro. Having that hard backer allows me to still drive the hook home, but have a rod that I can kind of play the fish with. Now, when you're throwing these bigger baits, I like to throw like a 3/8 or this 5/16 ounce swim jig on a 7'3" medium fast, or in some cases depending on which one I'm throwing. So when I'm throwing the finesse swim jig with the lighter hook, I like to throw that medium rod. I've found that throwing it on a medium heavy rod will actually bend that hook out and cost you some fish. Now, typically going to be throwing that on 12 to 18 pound fluorocarbon straight. Just depends on how deep I'm fishing, and if it's dirtier water, I can get away with a little bit thicker line. I like to stay as minimal as possible, but still be able to drive the hook home. And then when I'm throwing these big, heavier, stout hooks like that bigger swim jig, the big Denny Brauer flipping jig, I like to throw those on a 7'3" as well, medium heavy, fast action rod. I'm a big advocate for the Arc Cobb series. If you haven't checked those out, for the price relative, I feel like they're just a rod you can't beat. Their rod's pretty dang sensitive. They're pretty light for like the $100 to $150 price range. I really think you can't beat them. So if you're in the market for a new rod, I'm in no way affiliated, but if you're looking for a good rod, I call them my budget badasses. I would definitely recommend checking out the Arc Cobb series rods. And then for me, reel wise, on any bait caster, every bait caster I have owned, I spend the money. I buy the Daiwa Tatulas. I throw a 7-3, or I've got some 6-4-1s as well. But 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna throw it on that 7-3, or with the bigger jigs, I might up that to like an 8-to-1 gear ratio. Alrighty, guys. Well, that's everything that pertains to jigs when it comes to fishing with Chase. If you have any questions or would like me to go in depth a little bit more about kind of trailers, jig styles, or anything like that, make sure to drop that comment for me down below. If you're new and you've made it this far, leave me a comment that says go, and I'll make sure I subscribe back to you. If you're new, hit the subscribe button, leave me that like and a comment down below, and I'll be putting some other stuff together to bring to you guys here real soon. We are getting some ice here in Indiana finally, so I'm hoping to be jumping out there on the lakes and getting some action footage for you. I hope you have a great rest of your night. God bless you guys.